With our CBS News polling showing a dead heat in the presidential contest, voters under the age of 30 could prove decisive. That's potentially 25 to 30 million votes, depending on whether or not they turn out. Our tireless polling unit has been surveying these young voters to see what their mood is like in 2024. And by most measures, they say it is tough going out there, especially when they compare their generation to previous ones. 82% of young Americans say it's harder for them to buy a home. More than 3/4 of young voters think raising a family will be more difficult. 7 in 10 say it's harder to get a good job, and 6 in 10 think it's harder to start a business. Joining us now is our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, so what made you focus in on this generation? How are they different?
Well, we're going to look at all the key groups in this election, but I wanted to start with this one. What's interesting about them is they feel like they've already been tested in their lives. This is a generation, the younger part of them, who were in high school or college during COVID and the lockdowns, and most of them tell us that interrupted their education. They also look back, say they were more concerned about gun violence during those years than older generations. But what's really interesting here is they are also feeling like the older generation has left them a world that's more dangerous and a climate that's worse. And that motivates a lot of the issues that they care about. Having said that, Margaret, you can look at polling from the 60s when the baby boomers were the young generation then, from the 90s when it was Gen X. There have always been generation gaps in America. But for this generation today, they're the most racially diverse generation that the country has ever seen. And that comes out in their politics, too. They tell us they feel that politics would be better, not just with more young people in it, but also with more minority voices in politics, with more women in elected office. And they feel that way much more so than the oldest generation does.
So they have all this frustration. What are they going to do about it? Are they going to vote?
That is the key question. For all the concerns that we just laid out, they don't vote, and they don't say they're going to vote as often as the older generation does.
That's kind of typical, isn't it?
Well, it is in that way. So you've got about 2/3 of them who say this year they're definitely going to vote. And you've got almost all of folks, say over 65, who say that they'll definitely vote. Part of the factor here is age and how they see the candidates. They think that the candidates, being the ages that they are, cannot relate and understand the issues that pertain to young people. And they're also a little more disappointed in their choices. What's key about that is when young people say they're disappointed in their choices, they're less likely to vote. But for older folks, even when they're disappointed in their choices, they still turn out. So that motivation is going to be a key question, and I'll button it up with this. They are leaning towards Joe Biden. In fact, they're voting for Joe Biden, the ones who will vote, in about the same numbers that that young people then did in 2020. But it's that turnout dynamic and that relative lack of turnout that's really going to be a key thing to watch in this group for the campaign.
So what makes them start to view the ballot box as a way to change what they're frustrated about? Are there issues that would make them say, OK, I will drive and cast a vote, or I will drop that vote in the mail?
Yeah. So big differences are beyond the economy, which everybody cares about. They're more likely to point at issues like abortion, to point at climate and climate change, which I mentioned earlier, and also race and diversity issues as being important relative to what older generations say. In all those things, those accrue to Joe Biden, right? The people who care about those issues are voting for Joe Biden, which underpins some of his support. But having said that, they aren't paying as much attention to the campaign, and a substantial portion of them aren't sure what the candidates would do on those issues. There's a substantial portion who aren't sure what Joe Biden would do on abortion. Now, what's important about that is that means when we watch this campaign going forward, can the candidates not just motivate them, but also inform them about what they would do so that they can make ostensibly a more informed choice?